Let's give Lee a hand. That was just lovely. Did everyone love that? It sounded difficult as well, which is why I wanted to applaud. It might not be. To me, it sounded very difficult. Good morning. It's so good to be back up here. I hope so far you've had a good 2012. I felt like the sentiment for a lot of people that I talked to as the year ended was, oh, I'm ready for a new year. I'm ready for a new year. And I don't know about you, but I've already spent some time in my closet and my cupboards going through and getting rid of the old and figuring out where the new goes. Because I think that's a great time to kind of think about old and new as we enter into a new year. This Christmas, I got an iPad. For those of you who are at ADG, you saw it in action. They asked a question, I said, I'll Google that. I'm just gonna look that up. Now, an iPad, I've never had a smartphone, so raise your hand if you've had a smartphone. I always said my phone was sort of mildly intelligent, but it really wasn't a smartphone. So the whole notion of apps was very new to me, very new to me. So this is sort of like a really big iPhone is kind of how it feels a little bit, or a really small computer. And you get apps that do all kinds of things. I have like 30 versions of the Bible on here. I have the whole lectionary text, the Christian lectionary for each week, for the next 3 years on here. I have, I think, 10 books I've downloaded on my Kindle for iPad already. I'm a reader, sorry. That's what I'm gonna use it a lot for, is reading. I don't know why I apologized. I shouldn't apologize. I'm a reader. It's good stuff. Yeah. Can you imagine if your pastor got up and said, I never read anything. I never read anything. The one thing that I realized was that I can program my DVR with this. I felt like the Jetsons. Does anyone know the Jetsons? Jetsons, right? I can, like, right now while I'm speaking, I could go, oh, hey, Anna Green Gables is on Classics. Awesome, record. I won't do that to you because that's rude. And also, if you follow me on Facebook, you know that I also found out that this can be turned into an ambient noise machine, which I sometimes need to sleep. And I found that there's really a lot of interesting noises. Usually for me, it's either rain or some sort of white noise. Does anyone use a white noise machine to sleep sometimes, like that noise? But what was funny is when you download the sleep application, there are noises like lawnmower. Raise your hand if you need the sound of a lawnmower to sleep. And the one I thought was funny for me was church bell. I don't know about other pastors. I can't speak for other pastors, Reverend Obernower, but the sound of a church bell is not relaxing to me. I think I'd be like, wait, I have a sermon. Wait, oh no, it's 2 in the morning. I have no sermon. But it's been a lot of fun to have it. And the interesting thing about the iPad is it's really not anything new. Things like iPhones and iPads, and for those of you who are around for different technology like the beeper. Did anyone ever have a beeper? I was young when the beeper came out, admittedly, but I never felt important enough to need one. No one needed me that bad. I was like in high school. So there's something wonderful about this, because wherever I go with my iPad, I carry with me the means to do work, the means to communicate, that I can get a hold of people, I can connect to people all the time, wherever I go on this. I have basically an office in here. And that's a wonderful thing. It's also a bad thing. I am connected to all the time. You can get a hold of me all the time. The office is with me all the time. So there's wonderful things about the new technology that we have, but there's also new issues it brings up, right? We can connect, but then how do we disconnect? Years ago, when everyone worked in these things called offices, does anyone remember those offices? Some people still have them. You could leave that office and your work sort of ceased in a way. But we carry it with us all the time, that connection, that deep need to hear what's going on with one another. And it also is sort of like being a part of a club, you know? When I was like, I have an iPad, I'd be like, you have an iPad? I have an iPad. Do you have an iPad? I have an iPad. What apps do you use? And that's how you share that information. It's being in that club. Are you cool? You got to get one. On my iPad, I downloaded a book from Peter Rollins that I gave to Reverend Obernour as a gift. It's called Insurrection. And in it, there's a story of a pastor. Every Sunday, he would stand in front of his church and he would say, each week after I leave this service, I go downtown and serve the poor, the oppressed, and the downtrodden. What do you do? How do you show your compassion to others? In this booming voice. And people would applaud. Oh, our pastor, he's great. And they would wave him off. He didn't have to stand at the line at the end. They're like, no, he's going to help the needy. Let him go. Let him go. He would be waved off. His family said goodbye to him. And after Sunday, every Sunday, he would go and help the poor. The problem was what he was actually doing was going to play golf. He was going to play golf. This deception had been going on for years, but eventually came to the attention of some of the angels in heaven. They were watching. They were furious at his lies and reported the situation directly to God. After a little consideration, God said to the angels, I will visit with this minister on Sunday and teach him a lesson he will never forget. Sure enough, next Sunday came. God showed up at the church. Sad that has to be said, you know. Yet again, the minister informed the congregation that he was going to serve the poor before actually leaving for the golf course. This time, however, God intervened. When the minister took his first shot, the ball took off, flew through the air, bounced onto the green, and dropped right into the hole. Hole in one. The minister was amazed. At the second hole, the same thing happened. At the third, at the fourth, right through to the last hole. He had a perfect game. And with that last stroke, the minister sliced that ball badly and curved around and continued his streak of a perfect game. And while the angels in heaven watched, they took an utter belief stance and sort of looked at God and said, I thought you were going to punish the minister for all his lies, but instead you gave him the perfect game of golf. And God said, but who's he going to tell? Because we don't need an iPad to know that even though the iPad is a new technology, it represents something deep-seated in us as old as time, and that is a desire to be connected to one another. And so oftentimes when the good thing happens to us, if you're married or if you have kids or you have good friends or you have a church community, what do you do when something good happens? You tell someone. You put it up on Facebook, you call them on the phone, because we know that as human beings, our enjoyment, our pleasure is tied up to those around us, tied up to the community that we're in. We realize and we understand that the most precious thing sought after is our connection to others. How do we fit in here? Who loves us? Who doesn't love us? Think about it. Even in your most private fantasies, the places you go to, when I was little, it was singing with the Osmond family. I did it in my bedroom. But it wouldn't have been a private thing. It would have been at the Grammys, right? Singing with the Osmond family. Because even in our most private moments, we're always looking for that crowd, that approval, that connection. We're always looking for that audience of people that will not reject us, that will surround us. Whether it's on Facebook or in a letter or face-to-face or a million miles away, we want to know that we're connected with those that love us. And if we've ever been bullied or rejected, we often come back with, we will show that person. We must let them know. That's a story as old as time, revenge. As we talked about, we were in Genesis this morning. One of the earliest stories about revenge is in Genesis. It's not a new thing. Do you know what Facebook is? I don't mean technically what it is. Do you know the story of Facebook? Facebook was created, or so it goes, for Mark Zuckerberg to get revenge on a girlfriend, to let her know he was important and smart and wanted by other women because she'd rejected him. So every time you log on to Facebook, be reminded that even though it's a new technology, it harkens back to a human need that's as old as time. New vehicle, old situation. We want to be known, we want to be seen on the most fundamental level, whether it's on Twitter or Facebook or Instagram or blogging or Google+ or MySpace if you're, 5 years ago. We want to be known and seen and loved. We want to be respected. And so when we aren't those things, we often react badly with suspicion. Why don't you like us? Why don't you want us? Why aren't we needed? Why aren't we connected? And so it's often those questions, those deep-seated fears and questions that we have on a very guttural level that we not only take with us in every aspect of our lives, but we also take it with us to church, don't we? Does God love us? Does God want us? Does God connect to us? We want to know. Same desire, old desire, new way of thinking about it. Because nothing old ever stays old. Everything is made new again. Nothing is ever truly new. It's always something that's come before. Everything changes, though, not because new is better, but because old desires just take on new forms. And God does not work in new for the sake of new. If you read anything throughout Scripture, the Old and the New Testament, you see that there's very little sort of new that God does. When he does something new, we know about it. But most often those stories are of something old being made new again. Something old, someone old, some old situation being redeemed and restored and renewed. Because I'm here to tell you that God isn't just about the latest and greatest. God is about making old things new. And for the Ephesians, the little church in Ephesus that Paul oversaw from far away, they had that question too. Here's a little church at the first century. Jesus had sort of just not been on, what was going on. They're coming later after the story of this guy, Jesus. They're trusting Paul. They're trusting their teachers. And they want to know, how do we connect? How do we fit in? How does this church, our little church, and it wouldn't have been in a beautiful sanctuary like this, they would have probably met in a small home, but it doesn't matter where they meet because the question is still fundamentally the same. They're asking, if we're going to worship here, we are going to be a part of this big God thing that's happening here. We're a church. Where do we fit? How do we connect? Are we new? Does the old go away? Or is something else going on? And so Paul tells the church in Ephesus, Ephesians 3, 1 through 12, he says this is the reason, and as you know, whenever you hear this is the reason, it goes back to a few paragraphs of Paul talking to them as Gentiles and saying, you were predestined. That scary word we hear a lot. You ever hear that? You kind of go, what does that word mean? Predestined. I think it means don't fear. You were always a part of the plan. Even though this is a new thing that's happening in Christ, this was always the plan from the beginning.